She stood on the bridge, ready to let go of everything, until a quiet stranger stopped his truck and changed both of their lives forever. What he didn't know that day was that saving her would become the moment that saved him. If stories of kindness, healing, and unexpected love move your heart, consider subscribing. We share real and fictional tales that remind us miracles often begin with the smallest act of compassion. Now let me tell you what really happened the day a broken widow met a struggling single dad, and neither of them walked away the same. The first snow came early that year in Pine Hollow. It wasn't the gentle postcard kind of snow, but a biting wind-whipped flurry that buried sidewalks before sunset and made you think twice before stepping out again. Colton Reeves adjusted the collar of his worn flannel coat as he pulled his pickup truck onto the narrow bridge outside town, fingers tapping against the wheel in rhythm with the wipers. His daughter Daisy sat in the passenger seat, a bundle of pink scarves and sleepy eyes humming quietly to herself. "You okay, Bug?" Colton asked, glancing at her. Daisy nodded. "Just sleepy? Are we almost home?" "Almost," he said softly. Then he saw her, a figure barely visible through the windshield blur standing near the middle of the bridge. No coat, just a black dress and long dark hair twisting in the wind. She stood still, facing the edge. Colton's heart dropped. He hit the brakes, jolting the truck to a stop. "Stay in the car," he told Daisy, voice low but firm. Without waiting, he threw open his door and ran into the snow. "Ma'am," he called out, boots skidding on the icy slats. "Are you all right?" No response. She took a step, then another. And then, with the smallest motion, she climbed the rail. No, she fell. Colton didn't hesitate. The next seconds were a blur. He vaulted the rail, heart thundering in his chest, diving into the black, frigid water below. It stole his breath instantly. The cold wrapped around him like a vice. But he fought the current, kicking hard toward the splash. Her body surfaced a few feet away, limp, drifting. He reached her, wrapped an arm around her waist, and paddled with everything he had. His fingers went numb. His arms screamed, but he didn't let go. By the time he reached the muddy embankment downstream, headlights were approaching. Someone had called 911. He collapsed on the shore, dragging her onto the rocks. He felt for a pulse. It was faint, but it was there. She didn't speak at the hospital. Not after they pulled the lake water from her lungs. Not when they asked her name. Not when they brought her dry clothes or whispered words of comfort. The staff nodded with that quiet understanding, reserved for those who had seen the worst and come back. Not quite whole. Colton stood outside her room, coat still damp, hands shoved in his pockets. Daisy clutched his leg, looking up at him with wide eyes. "Is she gonna be okay, Daddy?" He looked at the woman curled up in the hospital bed. She had a gash above her eyebrow. Lips, pale. Eyes. "Shut, I think so, baby." Her name was Willa Monroe. She was 31, widowed just 6 weeks earlier. Colton heard the rest from a nurse who got it from a folded-up driver's license tucked in the back of her boot. No. Next of kin listed no emergency contact, no wedding ring, just her name. And pain. A lot of it. The nurse, a kind older woman with salt and pepper hair, sighed. Some people fall so deep, it takes someone else jumping in to pull them back. Colton didn't say much, but the words stayed with him. 3 days later, Willa still hadn't spoken. They were going to discharge her. She had no one, nowhere to go. So Colton did the only thing that felt right. He brought her home. The guest house behind Colton's cabin was nothing fancy, just a refurbished woodshed with patched windows and a space heater that rattled like an old man's lungs. But it was warm, clean, and quiet. Willa didn't object. She simply stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed, looking lost. "I'll bring you some dinner later," Colton said. No pressure to talk. She nodded. That was the first time she moved of her own accord. Daisy was full of questions, of course. Why did she jump? Why was she crying? Is she gonna stay forever? Colton didn't have answers. He just tucked his daughter in and whispered, "Sometimes people break, sweetheart. But that doesn't mean they're gone. Sometimes they just need time to find the pieces." Later that night, Colton stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the snow-covered trees. A light flickered in the guest house window, just a flicker. But it was enough. She'd turned on the lamp. She hadn't given up. Not completely. And neither would he. The first morning after Willa arrived was heavy with silence. Colton stirred his coffee in the kitchen, listening to the faint creaks from the guest house outside. The snow had settled deeper overnight, blanketing the pines and wrapping the cabin in a kind of hush that felt both peaceful and strange. He glanced at the back window. The light in the guest house was on. Progress, maybe. Daisy padded into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes and climbing onto a stool. "Is she still here?" "Looks like it," Colton replied. "Are we going to talk to her today?" We'll see. Daisy rested her chin on her hand. She looked really sad. Like inside sad. Not outside sad. Colton looked at his daughter, both amused and moved. You might be right. By mid-morning, Willa stepped outside. She moved slowly, cautiously, wearing a borrowed sweater from the donation box and a pair of worn boots that didn't quite fit. She looked thinner in the daylight, paler too, like someone who hadn't eaten properly in weeks, but her posture held something that hadn't been there before, an edge of intention. She wasn't drifting anymore. Colton met her halfway between the cabin and the guest house, hands in his coat pockets. "Morning," she nodded barely. "I thought maybe you'd like some breakfast. Daisy made pancakes." Sort of, her lips twitched. Not a smile, but not a frown either. He stepped aside. "Come in if you'd like, no pressure." She hesitated, then followed him inside. The cabin's kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the scent of maple syrup and melting butter. Daisy was already seated at the table, swinging her legs and carefully slicing a stack of uneven pancakes, she said brightly. "I made those." Willa gave a soft nod, then sat down. Slowly, Colton poured her coffee and slid the sugar jar toward her. "It's not gourmet, but it'll stick to your ribs." She stirred her cup in silence. Then finally her voice emerged, quiet, almost brittle. "Thank you." It was one word, but it echoed. Daisy beamed. "You're welcome." The meal passed slowly. Willa didn't eat much, but she didn't pull away either. She listened. She watched. She seemed to take in the warmth, like someone who'd been living in shadows too long. After breakfast, Daisy returned to her drawings. Willa stayed seated, tracing her finger along a knot in the wood grain of the table. Colton didn't press her. He washed dishes and waited. Finally, she spoke again. "You didn't have to save me." Colton paused, a dish in his hand. Didn't think about it. "Most people wouldn't have jumped. I'm not most people." Willa looked down. "I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I didn't plan it. I snapped. One minute I was walking. The next, I was climbing." Colton dried his hands and leaned against the counter. "What happened?" She looked up, her eyes glassy but dry. "Everything." Bit by bit, her story came out. Her name was Willa Monroe. She'd married young, loved deeply, and followed her husband Ben wherever his career took them. He was a site supervisor, working long hours in construction. She handled everything else. The house, the bills, his aging parents. She didn't mind. She was proud of how they built their life. Then came the storm. Literally, Ben died in a scaffolding collapse during a windstorm. Willa had called him that morning, worried, begged him to stay home. He went anyway. The company said it was a freak accident. His parents blamed her. They said she pushed him to keep working, that she always worried about money, that it was her fault. They said I killed him, she whispered, voice shaking, that I made him go to work that day. Colton felt something twist in his chest. You didn't. They made me leave the house, said I wasn't welcome at the funeral reception, said I'd embarrassed the family by falling apart in public. God, he muttered, I had nowhere to go. No job, no savings. Everything was in his name. I spent the last of my money on a bus ticket to nowhere. Ended up here. I was walking across the bridge because I didn't know what else to do. Colton didn't speak for a while. The only sound was the faint scratch of Daisy's pencil in the next room. Thank you, Willa said again, softer now, for pulling me out. For not looking at me like I'm broken glass, I think. Colton said slowly that broken glass still catches light. She didn't stay long that day, just long enough to drink her coffee and listen to Daisy read her a poem about squirrels. But it was enough. When she stood to leave, Colton offered her a small cardboard box. What's this? She asked. Some sweaters, blankets, a space heater I fixed up. She hesitated. They're not gifts, he added. They're tools for starting again. Willa blinked, eyes shiny but defiant. She took the box. Starting again, she echoed. That's a tall order. Colton shrugged. You already did the hard part. She looked up at him. Which part? Choosing to stay. The guest house creaked in the cold. It was the kind of sound that only happened when wind shifted just right. Not loud, not urgent, but subtle, like a memory brushing against the walls. Willa sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in one of the thick sweaters Colton had left for her. Her hands were still folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes, however, never stopped moving, tracing the corners of the room as if trying to learn the shape of her new world. It was small. A twin bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. No TV, no mirrors, just a quiet room with heavy curtains and the faint smell of cedar wood. Quiet was fine. Quiet didn't judge, but it also didn't answer. Colton didn't bother her much that first week. He checked in with a knock once a day, offered food, asked if she needed anything. Left her alone if she didn't reply. Daisy, on the other hand, was a different story. By Wednesday, the little girl was drawing pictures every afternoon, slipping them under the door with handwritten labels. That's me and you. This is your house now. I made you a dog. He's quiet too. Willa couldn't help it. She smiled. The first time in, she didn't even know how long. On Friday, she opened the door. Not to leave, not yet, but to step out onto the small porch and sit in the sunlight. It wasn't warm by any stretch, but the light felt honest, necessary. She brought the drawings with her, spread them out on her lap. She hadn't drawn anything herself in years. Not since college. Not since marriage turned her days into something practical. Willa had been good with charcoal, once. Hands that could capture emotion in a few smudged lines. But those hands had become oven mitts and laundry folders. Life had a way of turning art into lists. She sighed and picked up a crayon Daisy had left on the step. Just one line across the edge of a page. A curve, a shadow. It felt like breathing. Colton spotted her from the kitchen window. He didn't say anything, just leaned on the counter watching her in the winter sun. Head bowed as if listening to something no one else could hear. That night, he brought out a box of supplies from his workshop. Colored pencils, unused sketch pads, sharpeners, charcoal sticks, still wrapped in their paper bands. He placed it just inside the guest house door and left without knocking. The next morning, they were gone. By the following week, Willa was coming into the main cabin for meals. Not everyone, not yet, but enough to fill the kitchen with the sound of more than just forks and weathered conversation. She spoke a little more each time, usually when Daisy was around. The girl had a talent for drawing words out of people like a fisherman with a patient line. One morning, over toast and orange slices, Daisy asked, "Do you have a mom?" Willa hesitated. "She passed away when I was young." "Mine too," Daisy said matter-of-factly. "But my dad says, sometimes the people we lose send us other people to help. Maybe that's what happened." Colton, seated nearby, looked up startled. Willa met his eyes for the first time that morning. There was something like wonder there, and something heavier. "You think?" So she asked Daisy gently. Daisy nodded. "You're nice and sad, but nice." Willa laughed, a soft, rusty sound that surprised even her. Colton smiled into his coffee. Maybe the kid was onto something. Later that week, Colton invited Willa to sit in on a woodworking session with Daisy. She agreed, though, hesitantly, and sat in a corner chair as father and daughter worked on a simple birdhouse. Daisy chattered while Colton showed her how to sand the edges. Smooth, Willa watched their hands the way his steadied hers, the way her small fingers mimicked his careful movements. It was beautiful in its simplicity. No expectations, no pressure, just presence. When Daisy excused herself to get juice, Willa finally asked, "Did it take you a long time to feel normal again?" Colton didn't answer immediately. He smoothed the edge of a wooden plank, then looked up. "I don't think I feel normal. I just got better at carrying the weight." Willa nodded, biting her lip. "You don't have to rush anything," he said. "No one's waiting on you to be fixed. I don't want to be fixed," she whispered. "I just don't want to feel invisible anymore." "You're not invisible." She looked at him again. This time she believed it just a little. That night, Willa stayed in the kitchen longer than usual. Daisy had fallen asleep on the couch, a crayon still in her hand. Colton lifted her gently and carried her to bed. And when he returned, Willa was rinsing dishes in the sink. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied. "But I want to." They stood side by side for a while, her washing him, drying. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full of things neither of them had words for yet. Finally, she said, "I think I'd like to draw again." "For real?" "You should," he said softly. "The world could use more of that." She paused. "Thank you for letting me have a quiet room." Colton folded the dish towel and placed it gently on the counter. Sometimes a quiet room is where the healing starts. The storm rolled in just past midnight. It started with a sharp hiss against the windows, like wind testing the seams of the cabin's old bones. Then came the steady thrum of sleet rattling the roof and sliding in sheets across the frozen earth. Colton rose from bed instinctively. Muscles tense, like someone who'd learned to listen when nature spoke in warnings. He checked the thermostat, turned up the heat. Looked out toward the guest house. The light was off, but he could see the faint outline of the lamp Willa always left near the window. Just enough glow to say, "I'm here." By morning, Pine Hollow was encased in white. The roads disappeared. The trees bowed. Snowbanks leaned against mailboxes like drunks after a long night. Inside the main cabin, the scent of oatmeal and cinnamon lingered. Daisy, hair tangled and cozy in mismatched pajamas, sat at the table with a coloring book, while Colton poured coffee with one hand and flipped the radio dial with the other. No school, the announcer said cheerfully. No travel. No mail. Just hunker down and ride it out, folks. Colton wasn't surprised. What surprised him was the knock at the back door. It was Willa. She stood bundled in a thick wool coat, borrowed from a neighbor's donation box, a dusting of snow in her hair. Her cheeks were pink from the cold. In her hands, a casserole dish covered in foil. "I hope it's okay," she said. I had a box of pasta and thought, well, I just wanted to say, Thank you. Colton blinked. You cooked? She shrugged. I remember how some days he stepped aside, letting her in. Daisy looked up and grinned. Miss Willa. Hi, sweetheart. Colton took the dish from her, warm and heavy. This smells amazing. I promise it tastes better than it looks. That's a low bar, Colton teased gently. She laughed. It sounded lighter today, less brittle. They ate together by the fireplace, watching the storm dance outside. Willa told Daisy about a snowstorm she'd once gotten stuck in during a road trip to Michigan, how she and her husband had built a fort in their car with blankets and peanut butter crackers. Daisy's eyes widened. You slept in a car? Sure did, for 2 nights. Was it scary? A little. Willa admitted, but it was also kind of wonderful. Colton watched her as she spoke, the way her hands moved when she remembered the faraway look in her eyes, as she revisited moments frozen in time. She was thawing little by little. After lunch, Daisy ran off to build a pillow fort in her room, leaving the adults by the fire. Colton stoked the logs. Willa folded her hands in her lap. Thank you for letting me stay, she said quietly. You don't need to thank me every day. I do. You didn't have to save me. You definitely didn't have to let me in. Colton leaned back. You were never a burden. I felt like one, she said. He looked over, studying her profile, the faint line of a scar just beneath her temple, the way her shoulders curled inward when she wasn't speaking. Willa, he said gently, you've been carrying too much alone. She didn't respond right away. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. I thought if I could just disappear quietly, no one would blame me for it, she whispered. That maybe it would just feel like relief. Colton swallowed hard. I've thought that too, he admitted. After my wife passed, there were days when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain with bricks tied to my chest. But Daisy was always there, needing something, wanting breakfast. Asking where her socks went, she didn't let me go under. He paused. You didn't have Daisy. You had grief and blame and silence. That's more than most people can handle. Willa stared at the fire. I didn't want to die. I just didn't know how to keep living. Colton nodded slowly. Then let's figure it out. Together. She looked at him. Really looked. And in her eyes, blue-gray like a storm cloud that hadn't quite burst. There was a flicker. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the memory of it. That night after Daisy had fallen asleep, curled up in the living room, Fort Willa offered to help with dishes. Colton passed her a towel, and they worked in silence again. But this time, it was different. Comfortable, familiar. When they finished, Willa lingered near the doorway. I haven't felt this. Still in a long time, she said softly. Still is good, Colton replied. I used to think silence was the enemy, that if I kept moving, kept filling the air, I wouldn't have to feel things. He waited, and now he asked. She looked at him. Now I think, maybe quiet is where the healing begins. Colton gave a small smile. Told you the guest house was magic, she chuckled. More like haunted. Same thing some days. They stood like that for a moment, not close enough to touch, but not needing to. The air between them was charged with something unspoken. Then Willa stepped outside, pulling the coat tighter around her. She paused before walking away, glancing over her shoulder. Good night, Colton. Good night. Willa, he watched her disappear into the snow, a silhouette moving back toward the place she hadn't wanted to live in, and now couldn't imagine leaving. The next morning brought quiet sun. After days of slate skies and wind, like a warning, the air finally calmed. It wasn't warm. February never made that promise. But the sunlight slicing through the frosted pine trees made everything feel gentler, as if the storm had taken the worst with it. When it passed, Colton stood on the porch, sipping his coffee. The wood creaking beneath his boots, he could see Willa through the window of the guest house. She was sitting at the small table, her head bent, fingers moving across something he couldn't quite make out. He smiled to himself. Not intrusion, just curiosity. Later that afternoon, Daisy asked to work on a new birdhouse. She liked making things, even if they leaned crooked and the paint was always smudged. Colton pulled out the old tools, the extra pine slats he kept in the shed, and set up their makeshift workstation on the back porch. "Can I use the sander?" Daisy asked, eyes wide with excitement. Only with gloves and supervision. Willa appeared as they were finishing the measurements, her scarf tied loosely around her neck, a sketch pad in one hand. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "Not at all," Colton replied. "You're just in time for sawdust," Daisy grinned. "Wanna help us?" Willa hesitated, then stepped forward. "I've never built anything out of wood." Colton handed her a small carving knife. "Then today's your first." She was awkward with it. At first, holding the block of soft wood too tight, carving too deep. Colton didn't correct her. He just kept working beside her, letting her find her rhythm. Daisy chattered on about squirrels, about snow, angels, about her favorite subject in school. Art. Obviously, Willa listened more than she spoke, but she stayed. And then she carved. At first it was random, tentative lines, cautious curves. But then her hand slowed, became purposeful. Colton looked over and saw what she was shaping: a heart. Not the cartoon kind, but the real kind, curved slightly to one side, textured, rough, imperfect. It was beautiful. Willa stared at it as if surprised by her own hands. "I didn't plan that." "Sometimes," Colton said softly, "our hearts show up even when we're not looking for them." She met his gaze. A flicker of warmth passed between them. That evening, Willa placed the carved heart on the windowsill in the guest house. It caught the last golden light of the day, casting a soft shadow across the sill. She stood there a while, watching the trees, the roofline of the main house, the place where she had only weeks before arrived as a ghost. Now she was carving again, drawing, cooking, laughing. She had not planned for this. Grief, she realized, didn't always leave, but it could shift, make room. Over dinner, Daisy insisted Willa join them again. She had made a sign for the birdhouse feather palace, "No squirrels allowed." Willa laughed when she read it. "That seems a little exclusive." "Squirrels don't pay rent," Daisy declared. Colton raised an eyebrow. "Neither do birds." "They're prettier," Daisy countered. Willa's laugh echoed off the walls, and for a moment, Colton just watched her. The curve of her cheek, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was amused. Something flickered in his chest. Not new, not sudden, but alive. After Daisy went to bed, Willa lingered in the kitchen, helping Colton pack leftovers into containers. "She's remarkable," Willa said. "She is," Colton agreed. "Sometimes I think she's raising me. She reminds me of the version of myself I used to believe in." Colton leaned against the counter. "You're still that version." Willa shook her head gently. "She died when Ben died." He was quiet for a moment. "Maybe not. Maybe she's just been waiting for you to catch up again." Willa looked at him, eyes shining but not with tears. With something else. Recognition? Maybe. Or grace. "Why are you always so gentle?" she asked. Colton smiled faintly. "Because I know what it's like to be broken and tired and still show up." Willa took a breath, deep, full. "Then I want to try living again, not just surviving." Colton reached into a drawer and pulled out a fresh block of soft wood. He placed it in her hand. "Then carve a new heart, as many as you need." That night, in the quiet of her small room, Willa sketched a series of hearts, all slightly different. One with a crack running through it, one whole but weathered, one open. Then she drew Colton's hands, large, steady, holding a tiny wooden heart between them. and for the first time in months, she didn't cry herself to sleep. She just slept. The thaw came slowly, the kind that didn't announce itself with melting snow, but crept in through the edges. Warmer mornings, longer rays of sun across the kitchen floor, and fewer logs in the fireplace. It was still cold, still. February, but the sting had dulled. Willa had taken to walking down the dirt road each morning, wrapped in her scarf sketch pad under her arm. She always stopped at the same bend, the one where the pines parted, and the town of Pine Hollow came into view below. Still quiet, still slow, like it hadn't moved on without her. That morning, as she walked back up the path, she heard voices, unfamiliar ones, raised male. She stopped, heart tightening. The voices were coming from Colton's front porch. She recognized them before she saw them. Ben's brother, Everett Monroe. Tall, stern hair, too neat for a man who claimed to mourn. And their father, Hank Bigger. Louder, a man who had once hugged Willa with the weight of family, and now looked through her like a stain on a photograph. Colton stood between them and the doorway, arms crossed, not backing down. "She's not your concern anymore," Colton was saying. "She's our son's widow." Hank snapped. "You think she can just disappear after what she did?" Colton's jaw clenched. She didn't do anything wrong. She sent him to work that day. She begged him not to go, Colton countered. He chose to. Like every adult man does. Your son made a choice, and it cost him his life. You're grieving, but that doesn't give you the right to throw your pain on someone else's back. Willa stepped forward, then boots crunching in the snow. The three men turned to face her. Everett's eyes narrowed. "We're here to take her back to settle the estate." "I have nothing left to settle," Willa said quietly. "Ben's gone. The house isn't mine. You made that clear. You abandoned your role." Hank growled. Willa shook her head. "No, you took it from me." Silence. Then Colton said, "You've said what you came to say. Now leave." Everett stepped forward. "Who are you to keep her here?" "I'm the man who pulled her out of a river because she had no one left to fight for her," Colton replied. "And I'm not letting you undo that." Willa felt the heat rise in her throat, but it wasn't shame this time. It was something else. A strength that came from someone finally standing beside her, not above her. "You need to go," she said. Everett opened his mouth, but Hank stopped him with a firm hand on his arm. "Let's go," the old man muttered. "She made her choice." As they walked away, Willa stood still. Her hands were shaking. Colton turned to her voice, soft now. "You okay?" "No," she whispered. "But thank you. You shouldn't have to defend your right to exist. I didn't expect anyone to ever do it for me." Colton looked at her, really looked, and said, "We'll get used to it." They sat in the kitchen afterward, steam rising from mugs of tea. Neither of them really drank. Daisy was out playing with a neighbor girl, unaware of the confrontation that had just unfolded. Willa stared at her hands. "I thought seeing them would break me." Colton waited. "But it didn't," she continued. "It stung, but it didn't break me." "That's progress," he said. "It's something." She looked at him. "Why did you do that? Why stand up for me like that?" Colton leaned forward, elbows on the table, because no one should be made to feel like they're less than, especially not someone who's fought this hard just to breathe again. Her throat tightened. She swallowed. "I don't know how to repay you. You don't have to. Still, I want to do something." He smiled gently. "Then keep showing up for yourself, for Daisy." That's more than enough. That night, Willa returned to her guest house but didn't sleep. She lit a candle and opened her sketch pad. At first, her hand hovered, unsure, but then it moved, slow, deliberate. She drew Ben, Not the man in the accident reports. Not the cold ghost from the funeral. The real Ben, smiling in a winter jacket, holding her mittened hands, his eyes alive. She drew him whole, then for the first time since he died, she whispered aloud, "I forgive you, and I forgive me too." She closed the sketch pad and let the candle burn low beside her. In the morning, she brought the drawing to Colton. "I want to leave the past where it belongs," she said, offering him the page. But I needed to see him one more time. As he really was, Colton took it carefully, as if it were sacred. He looked at it for a long time. "He'd be proud of you," he said. Willa blinked, I think. I finally believed that. Willa discovered the box by accident. She had been helping Daisy search for an old storybook, the one with the mouse who wore glasses and ran a cheese shop. Daisy insisted it was in the small storage closet between the kitchen and the laundry room behind the coats and beside a forgotten stack of holiday decorations. Willa found the book. But she also found a wooden box, unmarked, slightly dusty, with a brass latch that clicked softly when she opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, each carefully folded, each addressed to Clara. She froze. Later that evening, after Daisy had gone to bed, Willa stood in the doorway to Colton's workshop, the box in her arms. "I found these today," she said quietly. Colton looked up from his bench, startled, not angry, but caught, his hands rough and calloused, tightened around the chisel he'd been using. "I wasn't snooping," she added quickly. "They were just there." He nodded slowly. "I know." There was silence, thick, but not hostile. The air between them had changed, not fractured, just deepened. "You wrote to her," Willa said. Even after she passed, Colton set down his tool and wiped his palms on a cloth. I started writing the night after the funeral. Didn't know what else to do with the silence. Willa stepped closer. "Do you mind if I ask about her?" He hesitated, then pulled out a stool for her. She sat. Clara was kind, quiet, the kind of person who baked too much and left loaves on strangers' porches. She loved wildflowers, didn't care much for television, and made the best blueberry jam I've ever had. He paused. She had an aneurysm. No warning, 1 minute. She was laughing with Daisy the next. She was gone. Willa's breath caught. "I'm so sorry," Colton nodded. "It broke something in me. Not just the grief, the speed of it, the randomness. I kept asking why. And when the answers didn't come, I wrote." Willa ran her fingers across the top of the box. "They're beautiful, Colton. I only read a few lines, but..." "You loved her?" "Well, I tried. She must have felt safe." "She did. And that's what scares me," he said, looking at her now, his voice low. "Because I'm starting to feel that way again with you. And it's terrifying." Willa swallowed hard. Her throat tightened. "Me too," she whispered. They sat in silence for a while. Not awkward this time. Shared Willa reached into the box and pulled out one of the letters, the most recent one dated just 3 weeks earlier. She unfolded it and read aloud. "Dear Clara, Daisy still asks if you can see her drawings. I tell her yes, because I believe it's true. I think you'd like the woman staying with us. She doesn't know it yet, but she's been saving me in quiet ways. Just thought you should know. Love, Colton." Willa's hand trembled. "You wrote about me. I didn't know how not to." She looked at him, eyes wide with something unspoken. Colton met her gaze. "I wasn't looking to fall in love again." "Willa, but I'm not sure I have a choice." Her breath hitched. "I'm not ready." "You don't have to be," he said gently. "But I am." The next morning the box was gone from the closet. In its place on the shelf where Willa had found it lay a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting? Not his. It read, "Dear Clara, I think you'd be proud of him. I think you'd be glad he saved me, even though I didn't think I was worth saving. Thank you for loving him first. I promise I'll be gentle with his heart. Willa." That evening they didn't speak about it. Instead, they sat on the front porch, Daisy curled between them under a shared blanket, the sky painted in soft lavender and gold. Colton poured hot cider into mugs, and Willa drew slow, deliberate sketches of the pine trees across the horizon. No declarations, no decisions, just peace. And the quiet knowledge that something had shifted for good. It started with a smell. Cinnamon vanilla and something warm, like memory rising from the oven. Willa stood barefoot in the guesthouse kitchen, an apron tied hastily around her waist, watching the first tray of scones rise behind the oven glass. She hadn't planned it. Not really. It began with a craving. Then an old recipe card from her mother's tin box. Then flour on her cheek and butter on her knuckles. And now the entire place smelled like Sunday mornings, in a house she hadn't stepped into in years. She didn't cry. Not this time. She baked. Colton noticed it before he saw her. He walked past the guest house that morning with Daisy, who wrinkled her nose and said, "It smells like Christmas." Willa poked her head out the door, cheeks flushed from the oven. "I may have gotten carried away." Colton smiled. "You're allowed." "I made extra," she said, offering a towel-covered basket. They brought the basket inside and opened it on the kitchen counter. Scones, muffins, 2 small loaves of banana bread still warm. Daisy clapped. "Can we eat them all?" Willa laughed. "Only if you promise to leave a few crumbs." That afternoon, Willa wandered into town with a plate of leftovers. She stopped by the small library, first just a few shelves and a reading room mostly managed by volunteers, then the post office, then the firehouse. She didn't say much, just handed over baked goods and smiled. By the time she returned, her cheeks were pink from the wind, and her basket was empty. Colton was on the porch, sanding down a piece of oak. "You okay?" he asked. "I think I made friends today," Willa said, a little breathless. 3 of them. He chuckled. "That might be a town record." She tilted her head. "You're not going to ask why I figured you'd tell me when you're ready." She hesitated. I want to start something." He set down the sandpaper, like a bakery. "Not a full one?" "Not yet, but maybe a table. Just a little table near the farmer's market or the library. Nothing big. I'm not ready for big." Colton's voice was gentle. "Small is sacred, too." Her eyes shimmered. "You really think so? I do." The next week, they cleaned out the old storage shed behind Colton's house, the one with cobwebs and rusted shelves and a forgotten sewing machine in the corner. Willa turned it into her prep space. Colton strung up fairy lights. Daisy painted a sign that read, "Willa's Table." Made with heart. Every detail felt intentional, quietly celebratory, like planting something in spring and believing it would grow. Opening day was a Saturday. The wind was brisk, but the sun cooperated. Willa set up her small wooden table near the library, laid out baskets of scones and muffins, and poured cider from a thermos. She didn't advertise. She didn't need to. The smell did the work. People came slowly, some out of curiosity, some because they remembered the basket she'd left on their counter. A few stayed to talk. Most stayed longer than they planned. One woman in a worn shawl took a bite and closed her eyes. "Tastes like something I forgot. I missed." Willa blinked hard. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my food." "Don't let it be the last," the woman replied. By noon, she was out of everything. She packed up slowly, feeling the warmth of the day settle into her bones, like sunlight, that finally believed she could carry it. Colton arrived just as she was folding the tablecloth. "You did it," he said. "I did. How do you feel?" Hungry, she laughed. I didn't eat anything all morning. He handed her a wrapped sandwich, figured she took it, brushing her fingers against his. Thank you for helping me believe I could. You did that on your own. Not quite. They sat together on the library steps, eating in silence. It wasn't the meal that mattered. It was the presence, the shared space. She leaned into his shoulder just for a moment. He didn't move away. That evening, Willa returned to the guest house to find a box waiting on the porch. No note. Inside new oven. Mitts a handwritten recipe journal and a tiny jar of dried lavender. She knew who it was from. She also knew she was no longer the woman who had stood on that bridge. She had hands that baked neighbors, who smiled a child who drew her hearts, and a man who saw the whole of her, not just the broken parts. And for the first time since Ben's death, she didn't dread tomorrow. She looked forward to it. Spring didn't arrive all at once in Pine Hollow. It trickled in, slow, cautious, like it didn't want to startle anyone. The snow melted in patches, not floods. Green appeared first in the moss, along fence posts, then in stubborn blades of grass that pushed through the earth, as if to say, "We're still here." So was Willa, not just present, but rooted. She'd taken to baking early before the birds were fully awake. Colton would sometimes wake to the scent of warm bread, and cinnamon carried through the open window with the morning fog. He never told her, but those mornings felt like peace, like something whole. Daisy, ever the fearless observer, seemed to know something had changed, not dramatically, but subtly. At breakfast one Sunday, while Willa wiped jam from her cheek and Colton poured her a second cup of coffee, Daisy looked at her father and asked, "Do you love Miss Willa?" Colton nearly spilled the pot. Willa froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Daisy, unfazed, popped a blueberry in her mouth and said, "Because I think she loves you." Colton cleared his throat. "That's a big question, Bug, but it's not scary," Daisy said. Matter-of-factly, Miss Willa makes things not scary. Even when it rains, Willa smiled, then soft, uncertain. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me," Daisy beamed. It's true. They didn't talk about it that day. Not in words. But that afternoon, while Willa organized her recipe cards on the porch and Colton replaced a broken hinge on her door, their hands touched briefly. He didn't move away this time, and she didn't either. A few days later, Willa found Colton in the workshop, standing over a block of cedar. He looked focused, lips pressed tight in thought. She stepped in quietly. "What are you making?" He didn't answer right away. "Then something for you," baby. Her heart skipped, but she didn't push. Instead, she stepped beside him, watching the slow curve he carved along the wood's edge. "You're good with your hands," he chuckled. "It's about the only thing I know how to be good at." "That's not true." He looked at her, then long and level. "No, you're good with people, even when you don't want to be. You listen more than most, and you never make me feel like I'm broken." Colton set down his chisel. "You're not broken. Willa, you're blooming." She inhaled sudden and sharp, not because of the words, but because of how gently he'd said them. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, Colton sat on the porch, steps, watching the last light melt over the horizon. Willa joined him, 2 mugs in hand. They sat shoulder to shoulder, their knees barely touching. After a while, she said, "Do you ever think about more?" He looked at her brow, furrowed. More than this. More than friendship. More than surviving." Colton didn't answer right away. He took a long sip from his mug. "I do," he said quietly. "But I'm scared I'll ruin it, that I'll want too much and lose the only good thing I've had since Clara." "You won't," she said simply. "You don't know that I know how it feels to be held gently. and I know I'm not afraid of you." That made him look at her. "You've never made me feel small," Nuala continued. "Not once. And I think that's what love should start with, the kind of safety that grows things." His voice when it came was thick. "I don't want to rush you. You're not. Then what do we do?" She smiled, reaching down, taking his hand in hers. We let it grow, like spring slow but steady. Colton turned his palm upward, curling his fingers around hers. It wasn't a confession. It was an answer. Later that week, Daisy drew a picture and stuck it on the fridge. It showed 3 people holding hands, standing in front of a house with a heart above it. A tiny dog sat nearby, smiling for no reason. Colton asked, "What's the heart for?" Daisy grinned. "It means you don't have to say it out loud." Willa, watching from the doorway, felt tears rise, not from sadness, but from that overwhelming swell of being seen. She didn't need to say it either. It was already there, in the bread that rose every morning, in the wood shaped carefully by calloused hands, in a child's drawing that didn't leave anyone out. It wasn't planned. Willa had driven into town early that morning to drop off fresh loaves at the farmer's market the way she always did on Saturdays. The road curved past Pine Hollow Creek, the same way it always had. And then she saw it. The bridge, the one she had tried to forget, the one her body had surrendered to, and the one Colton had pulled her back from. She slowed, pulled over. For a long moment she sat behind the wheel, fingers trembling lightly over the ignition. Then with a breath, both steady and shaking, she stepped out. The bridge looked smaller now, less like an ending, more like a pause. The wood was weathered but familiar. The railing still bore faint scratches from decades of traffic and time. And below, the water moved slowly, no longer frozen, no longer violent. Willa walked to the center. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She stood, closed her eyes, let the wind lift her hair, and whispered, "Thank you for not letting me go." Colton found her there an hour later. He hadn't been looking, not exactly. But when she hadn't returned, and her phone went to voicemail, something in his chest tightened. He followed instinct, not panic, and when he saw her silhouette on the bridge, standing with her arms on the railing, he didn't call out. He simply walked to her. She turned when she heard his steps, but there was no surprise on her face, only understanding. "You came," she said softly. "I'll always come." She turned back toward the water. "I needed to see it again." On my own terms, he stepped beside her, silent. "It doesn't scare me now," she continued. "It hurts, but I'm not afraid. That's brave. No, that's healing." He nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. She glanced at him. "You ever come back here?" Once he said, "The day after I lost Clara, I stood right here. Thought about following her. Thought maybe I'd see her on the other side of the water." Willa took his hand, but then Daisy's voice popped into my head. He said, "She was 2. Could barely say my name, but I heard her say, 'Daddy!' and it pulled me back." They stood in silence again, hands intertwined, bound by losses that had tried and failed to drown them. Then Willa turned toward him. "There's something I want to say," she whispered. "Not because I have to, but because I want to." He looked at her, steady, calm. "I love you, Colton Reeves," his breath caught. "I love the way you see people, the way you never push, the way you sit with grief like it's not something to fix, just something to hold." She exhaled, trembling now. "You saved me, not just from that night, but from the quiet afterward, from disappearing." Colton stepped closer, brushing a thumb along her cheek. "I love you too. Willa Monroe. I think I have since the second cup of coffee." She laughed, eyes glassy. That early I move slow, but I fall hard. And then, beneath the spring sky on the bridge that had once nearly taken her life, he kissed her gently, reverently. Not a promise, a prayer. That evening they returned home to find Daisy in the kitchen, flour on her elbows, proudly announcing, "I made cookies." Willa leaned in to whisper, "Your dad kissed me today." Daisy gasped, "On the mouth." Willa laughed. "Yes." On the mouth, Daisy threw her arms in the air. "Finally!" Colton groaned. Okay, that's enough," cheering from the peanut gallery. Willa knelt to Daisy's level. "How do you feel about us? Being a real family?" Daisy looked thoughtful. "Do I still get to sleep in the middle on movie nights?" "Absolutely." Then Colton reached for Willa's hand. "Me too." That night, as the three of them curled on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and a blanket too small for 3 people, but just right for the occasion, Willa leaned her head against Colton's shoulder. "I never thought I'd get to come back," she said softly. "You didn't come back," he replied. "You moved forward." She smiled, her heart full, not of perfection but of presence, of a man who pulled her from the edge, of a child who gave her permission to stay, of a bridge that no longer led to goodbye but home. 1 year later, the bridge looked different, not because it had changed the wood, still bore the same old grain, the same rusted bolts and carved initials, but because Willa saw it now, not as a place of endings, but of beginnings. She didn't come often, but sometimes when the bakery was closed early, and Daisy was with friends, and Colton was in his workshop, humming off-key, she'd walk here, just to stand in the place where her life had paused and then restarted. Today, though, she wasn't alone. Daisy walked beside her taller, now hair in braids, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. They stopped at the center of the bridge. Willa took a breath. "Do you remember the day your dad found me here?" Daisy nodded. "I was in the truck. I was scared, I was too. But you stayed." "I did." Daisy placed the flowers on the railing gently, reverently. "For old sadness," she whispered, "so new things can grow." Willa blinked fast. "You are the wisest person I know." That evening back at the cabin, Willa stepped outside after dinner to find Colton by the fire pit, poking gently at the coals. He turned when he heard her approach, she asleep, barely. She kept asking how much longer. He grinned. "She's more excited than I am." Willa sat beside him on the bench. "That's not possible." They sat for a while in comfortable silence, watching the flames glow low. Colton finally spoke. "I never thought I'd get to have this again. Me neither. A life that felt like mine. Not a placeholder. Not a shell." Willa reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "We made it ours." He nodded piece by piece. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day on the bridge?" "All the time," he said. "And every time I do, I thank God I was paying attention." Willa closed her eyes. "You gave me back my life." Colton looked at her. "Truly?" Looked and said, "No, you took it back. I just reminded you where to look." The next morning was bright and clear, the first truly warm day of the season. Friends and neighbors gathered under the big oak tree behind the cabin, where folding chairs formed a crooked circle, and mason jars of lemonade clinked with ice. There was music from a local bluegrass trio, and someone brought a tray of deviled eggs too early, as if unsure what else to bring to a wedding that wasn't quite a wedding, because Colton and Willa weren't the kind of couple who needed centerpieces or satin. They needed only this: a girl in a yellow dress walking proudly down the makeshift aisle with a basket of daisies and 2 vows whispered so quietly they barely reached the wind. "I choose you," Willa said. "Every day," Colton replied. "No rings, just carved wooden hearts exchanged by hand, each smoothed by months of sanding patient, as the love that shaped them. And when Daisy wrapped her arms around them, both shouting, "We did it," no one had a dry eye left. That night, long after the laughter faded, and the chairs were stacked, and the cake crumbs swept away, Willa stood in the doorway of the guest house, their guest house no longer. She looked around the kitchen, now hers too. On the windowsill sat the heart she carved that first spring, still weathered. Still whole, Colton entered behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You tired happy," she whispered. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. Same thing some nights. They swayed gently for a moment. No music, just rhythm. Then Willa turned to face him. "I was never supposed to be anyone's miracle," she said. Colton brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You are. I still have scars. So do I. I still grieve. So do I, and yet. And yet." Colton echoed, pulling her close. "Here we are." Later that week, Willa hung a small sign on the bakery wall, above the register, where everyone would see it. It was hand-lettered on cedar, carved by Colton, painted by Daisy. It read, "Some miracles don't arrive all at once. Some walk, slowly, stay quietly, and rebuild everything." And below it a date, the day of the bridge, not to remember the fall, but the beginning of the rise. And just like that, what began as a rescue on a quiet bridge became the miracle that none of them saw coming. If this story touched your heart, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Leave us a comment below and let us know. And if you enjoy stories that remind us of the power of love, kindness, and second chances, feel free to subscribe. We'd be honored to have you with us. Thank you truly for spending your time here. We hope this story brought warmth to your day, and maybe even a little hope to your heart. Until next time, take gentle care.